Welcome to the UST Education recorded webinar series. This session is powered by US Transactions. UST is a boutique payment processing firm providing you with personalized service. We offer agnostic, best fit technology solutions for associations, nonprofits, and enterprise clients.
Morning, everyone. My name is Carlos Cardenas, Senior Strategic Consultant at Delcor. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Victoria.
Yeah, good morning. Also with Delcor, excited to be here.
For my sports fans, if you've watched Pardon the Interruption, I think that was the inspiration for this session. So point-counterpoint, my colleague Ron, came up with this idea. And so we just kind of we want to have fun with this, right? And so we're not going to go, be at each other's throats, but we do want to have this conversation in terms of free versus paid tools. We, as consultants, we hear it all the time. We'll touch a little bit more about that. Or more on that. And so we just want to kind of walk through this, have some conversations, have you participate. We want it to be fun and engaging, not just us talking to you. So again, point counterpoint, we'll talk about some things in terms of free versus paid subscriptions. What are some considerations? What are some things that we should be thinking about? What are some trends? We'll even talk about case law in terms of where your data lives, how safe it is, how protected it is. Has it been used in case law to this point, and everything in between. So I'm going to start us off. I guess the questions for us to consider as we start talking is, we're going to use a lot of cliches, and so bear with us, right? Don't hold that against us. We like to say if the license is free, you are the commodity, right? I think that's the most cliche thing you've ever heard, we've ever said ourselves. Is the freemium license the most expeditious way to kind of get started? These are the overall questions. How can organizations encourage informed experimentation with some of these AI tools? If I use these tools, is my organization at risk? And, does my AI tool save, use, leverage, share, the prompts and all of the secrets that I share with it? So those are the overarching questions to kind of center ourselves. Learning objectives is, I'm just going to state these, or Victoria, would you mind sharing these, or I can do it? I'm like putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I think you can cover those,
Okay.
Carlos.
Learning objectives is analyze and evaluate the variables in the decision to use free or fee AI, free or fee AI license. Identify recommended guardrails if and when giving staff permission to use free AI licenses. Evaluate inputs to measure ROI if and when giving staff paid AI licenses. Discern key elements of terms and conditions, and the one that everybody scrolls by or scrolls down and totally misses it. And facilitate a discussion at your organization when considering free and paid AI licenses. I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. Rules of engagement. Again, this is cordial. I'll make a point, and my colleague will make the counterpoint. We'll talk a little bit about that. And if you want to share your counter to the counterpoint, go ahead and put that in the chat as well. So I'm going to take the stance of the free tools, and we'll start there. Our free tools, again, I'm putting myself as the person who doesn't know where to get started, doesn't have the support at the organization. I haven't really dipped my toes into generative AI. Should I go out and run and buy something, or should I start with the free tools? So I think my point for the free tools is, low barrier to entry, right? And there's no cost associated with it. I could tinker and experiment and figure out, like, do I like this? Do I like this particular tool? Or you may try a few variations, right? So it might be ChatGPT, it might be Claude, it may be some of the other ones. And so I just, from a standpoint of, I want to remove the barrier to access and jump in. and start to learn and experiment, I would argue that free tools are it's a safe, first step to get into these tools and figure out what they are all about. Victoria, what do you say about that?
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. I would offer that it may become a liability rather quickly, right? I'm also wondering if you use a seatbelt when you drive, because that's what it comes down to, right? For example, if you are only concerned with the speed and not with direction, I wonder where that's going to take us. And paid offerings definitely offer and buy you some more guardrails, such as onboardings, controls, perhaps a vendor that you can rely on, and actually gain a level of protection that you don't have with free tools. I'll give you the point that it's a quick start on your side.
It is a quick start. And again, I think in terms of learning and figuring out what the tools are, I'm not saying like put your whole life into these free tools, and we'll get to that part as well. But just asking those questions and I guess experiencing the magic, you could say, right? That is generative AI, and that may lead you to more informed choices. So something for our attendees to think about. What do you think about that free versus paid in terms of getting started? What have you done? What do you, offer your organization if you are a leader? You put that in the chat. Let's talk about some of those things. I'm going to say a quick cliche check, right? Move fast and break things. I think that's something we always hear, but I think that is my perspective here. Move fast, get into these tools, break things, let them break, figure out what went wrong, figure out from your failures, and then I think you can make a more informed decision.
Yeah. I
Uh,
like the comments from the attendees here. Everyone seems to be having different opinions. So that's good.
Nicole, if you want to pay attention to some of those things and maybe call out attention to, like, maybe there's a juicy comment in there that we need to stop and acknowledge and talk about. As time marches on, we could do that. In terms of data and privacy, and I think the risk of it, and I think that's really, the impetus for this conversation is, people share their secrets with some of these tools. And I can give you the example of my wife, right? So she shares anything and everything with these tools. And as much as I try to say, like, wait a minute, you may not want to put some of these, I'm not saying social security numbers, but some of these things that she's sharing with these tools, as much as I try to get her to stop and pause and think about it, it's not working. So she's moving forward. On the other side, if I say, like, should you consider, a $20 pro or plus license? I think she says that's too much money for me. I'm not spending that amount of money. So again, it's the give and take. What do you get out of it versus what do you have to give? I don't think she's thinking about, the perspective of, what is being done with my data. So again, if you are using free, you are the commodity. Your data is probably being used. Your data is probably being shared. And I'm kind of teetering on the line of I'm an advocate for it, or I'm cautiously, optimistic. So, again, those are some cautionary tales to think about when you're using some of these free tools. Victoria, what say you?
Yeah, I definitely want to talk to your wife, Carlos. I mean, what I mean here is that maybe she's training, or not maybe, almost sure that she's training the models for free, number one. I would also say that she's giving away information that may come back to you and her and others in different ways and maybe used in a way to perhaps target advertisements, or it may be used in other ways, right? What if she is creating a little bit of a digital twin, right? A digital twin of how she thinks, where she stands on certain topics, and what if that information may come back in the long term, right? What if at some point her prompts or her position may be used I'm exaggerating a little bit to make a point here. What if at some point that information may be used in court, right? Or is subpoenaed? Would she still hold the same position, right? What if at some point, Carlos, you guys start talking about divorce and the AI sort of information back and forth, could that be used as evidence? I'm just wondering.
I think it can, right? And I think not necessarily in divorce court, but I think there's precedent in terms of teenagers using these tools and, some unfortunate, I guess, consequences of that and going back to these organizations, companies and subpoenaing, the chat history to figure out like what exactly happened here. So I guess I'm kind of moving over to your side, right? In terms of the paid, because I feel like you do have to think about protecting yourself. I think we've all been groomed to recognize when you are doing Google searches and maybe you're watching YouTube and there goes that advertisement that pops up. And you're like, how the heck does it even know? Right. And I think we used to think it was magic, but now imagine you're using ChatGPT free, which has signaled, that it's going to offer advertisements. I think inevitably for an organization to market to you, it's going to have to know what you're entering in those prompts. So imagine you're, typing away with ChatGPT and watching YouTube, and all of a sudden, whatever you just typed in pops up on that screen. So again, is it going to surprise you? Are you groomed to kind of notice those advertisement appearances? I think you are to some extent, but I think it's still going to surprise you. I think you can.
Yeah, and
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, let me add, I'm watching the chat as well, and there's good commentary around even with the paid version, right? We're seeing that there's still an element of not 100% protection. So my invitation to the group is okay, and then still, right? It's better to have some protection than zero protection, I would add. So just wanted to call out how the audience is definitely tracking with us. Honestly, Carlos, I think they're siding with me, if you don't mind
Okay.
me saying that.
Yeah. I think, yeah, based on the audience, I am not surprised, right? I think if it were a different audience who people haven't used these tools, I think they probably would come to my side. But yeah, I think you've won this counterpoint here. I think the overall thing, right? Again, as you take yourself, you think about the organization and some of these tools, we all say that we know that our staff are using them. And if we're not giving them direction and guidance, or we're not paying for, $30 Copilot licenses or $20 ChatGPT Plus, then either they're coming out of their own pocket to pay for these paid tools, or they're going rogue and using them. And I think the question for us to think about is, if they are using the free tools, are they using them for their personal, I guess, benefit, or are they putting company information? So I think this is the tie into the organizational perspective. Are they putting member data into, and that's kind of the worst thing, to think about. But I would postulate that they probably are. So I'm just going to leave that there. Cliche check, right? If it's free, you are the product again, right? So it's like we all know that, and I don't know if we care about it at this point. Some of us charge forward, like my wife, right? I don't think she can hear me, but I think she's going to charge forward no matter what. Yes, it's on the bumper sticker, but it's also in the terms of service. And again, I think we're all greeted with these terms of service, and it's pages upon pages. Rather than kind of scrolling and endlessly to get to the end, to get to accept it, I would say like select all on your phone or computer, feed it to that generative AI and say like, what the heck is this actually saying? What should I be concerned about? Not going to stop you necessarily, but at least you would be a little bit more informed.
Yeah.
Any last things to add to that, Victoria, before we move on?
No, I think we're making good progress here.
Anybody want to make a counterpoint to Victoria's counterpoint, or a counterpoint to my point? If you're brave enough to take yourself off of mute, go ahead and share. And I see some folks I know, so don't make me call on you. I'm joking. So kind of a good segue into the terms of service. What are you actually agreeing to? What are those terms and conditions? And again, I mentioned my colleague Ron, this is a big sticking point to him. And he hears this all the time. And, he is against free tools as much as possible. And I don't mean to speak for him, but I will share some of the things that we've talked about. Um, you're giving away some of these things that are of your person are maybe of the organization. So what's the trade-off? What are you giving in return for that benefit, or what might seem beneficial at that time? So, Victoria, I'm going to let you make the point first in terms of the terms and conditions here.
Right, thank you. So paid licenses typically offer clearer compliance postures, data processing agreements, if the model is going to retain the information, if it can actually be used to train the models, right? The question is how much of it we're actually unchecking or unchecking the boxes. And I'll agree with the audience. Somebody was commenting, it is not probably 100%, but it takes us further in terms of protection. It's better. A little bit of protection is better than zero protection, I would argue. And it does take a little bit of work. Back to you, Carlos.
I would also say that the model is not necessarily training right away, and it's not going to be able to pinpoint, your exact prompt, right? I guess in that vast ocean of data that, these models are being trained on, maybe every 365 days, are they able to really pinpoint what Carlos said in this particular, prompt or chat and tie it back to me? I'm not sure it's clear. I'm not sure anybody is clear. And so I think, again, without really knowing where those edges are, I think that just gives people more confidence to kind of, jump in and maybe not be as scared of these terms and conditions. It's not going to affect me right now. That's, a year from now's problem. So I'm not thinking about it. Out of sight, out of mind type thing. And I say that facetiously, right? I'm just, I'm putting myself in that, free proponent here. And you also have these, I guess, switches or configurations where just because you use the free service or generative AI tool does not implicitly mean that you are training it. You have the option to say, I am using the free tool, but I don't want you to train based on my thing. So I offer Google search, right? Which now has Gemini assisted search. You could say, I don't want to see these things, right? So I don't know if that means don't train the model, but essentially in the search results, don't show me a generative AI assisted, search. So you have some control. I think it's moving towards a little bit more control. Is it total control? No. Is paid total control? I don't think so either, but I think you have much more flexibility. And I think the other thing to consider too is, getting off of these tools. And so you can say you build a relationship with some of these tools, and now you want to break up with that tool, right? Because maybe there's a better person out there that you want to, enter a relationship with. Again, being facetious, but you want to move from ChatGPT to Gemini type thing, right? So, do those free tools offer you an off ramp to consolidate all your information and give, Gemini a chance to import it? I'm not so sure that the free tools do. I think the paid tools give you a little bit more flexibility, but they are getting better. Anybody want to share anything that scares you about terms and conditions, and what pauses you, or where you hesitate on sharing with free versus paid?
Or maybe how much do we actually read those, right? Overall. I mean, I don't know if the audience feels how the audience feels here, but right, like Hannah is saying, I'm not a lawyer, right? Like, and it may be even if I try to read them, so the level of effort may not be commensurate. that would be an interesting question. How, for a friend, right? Like, how much effort do we put in actually reading these terms and conditions?
Yeah, quick cliche check again. Nobody reads the terms and conditions, and you may be engaged for that first paragraph, and you're like, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna read this whole thing. But then I think your mind probably gets distracted. If you're like me, your mind gets distracted, and you're like, you realize this is 3, 4 pages long, and then you're just gonna scroll and agree to it. So again, I just try it next time you're using it. Next time you try a free tool, you'll try to do that select all. If you're on your mobile phone, take screenshots. If you're on your desktop or laptop, feed it into this tool and say, like, what is it? What are the risks? That I'm engaging in by giving some of this information.
Right. At least check those boxes. And maybe you can also do it for your wife, Carlos.
She has a novella in these chat tools. And it's Spanish soap opera. I think that also begs the larger question, right? If human tendency or nature is to scroll past the terms of agreements, what does that mean? What are the implications for your AI policy inside the organization? I know you're not presenting it via mobile app, but are they essentially doing the same thing? And what are some things that you could do to have that conversation, to go through that, not word for word, line by line, but what are some things that, because you just can't have a general policy. You can, but that doesn't have teeth, right? So again, it should not be heavy handed. It should be iterative. It should evolve over time. But if you have 10 pages of an AI policy, I would just stop you right now and say, you're probably doing it wrong. And again, people are on different entry points of their journey. So you may have started small and now you have, more pages based on, the mission of your organization, but just things to think about. Put yourself in your staff place. Are they really thinking about some of these things? Quick anecdote before I move on. I did ask the question. We do anonymous surveys for some of our clients just to get a sense of where they are. And I did say, I asked the question, are you aware of the existence of a policy? And I think people predominantly said yes. And then I asked, do you know where it's located? And predominantly people said no. So they know it exists, but don't know where to find it. And then the people who did say yes, I said, do you understand what's in that AI policy or guideline? And a lot of people said, I'm not sure. So again, I think that it's a cross section of, what we're seeing with clients and organizations. You may see that as well.
Yeah, I think I would highlight from a leadership perspective, right, in your respective organizations, it's advisable to summarize or show which use cases, in which use cases the AI policy would apply, right? Nobody likes to read, or at least I don't like to read, a 100-page document or so forth. But maybe how do we communicate the AI policy in ways that the broader team can understand it and digest it, right? Like, what are the 3 things to do and maybe 1 or 2 things to not do? Because it's important to cascade that information for engagement purposes, for adoption purposes.
There's some good questions here. Susan's most recent comment caught my eye. And so even if policies exist, how are they even enforced? And so in this Wild West, sometimes, right, at organizations, if you know they're being used and you can assume certain data elements are being put, how are you aware of it? Not how do you catch them, but how are you aware of it? And then if you are aware of it, like how does your policy have teeth? Victoria, I'm going to go back to you. And have you seen anything? I can touch on that as well. How are these enforced? How can you enforce them?
I believe that before enforcement, perhaps there's an opportunity for adoption, right? And that's where my point about engaging your teams and making it easy to understand what's actually in the policy would be my first thought, to prevent any downstream complications, I'm going to say. So I think I would go with be preventive as opposed to corrective or risk mitigation, right? Trying to be more reactive. That's what I would offer.
Yeah, I would agree in terms of the more that people are informed about the policy and the particular use cases, I think the less likely you probably reduce or mitigate, I think, the risk around some of those things. You can't completely eliminate it, but rather than being punitive right away, I feel like people need to know uh, or need to be clear on exactly, those use cases. I think you probably have a conversation, right? Nobody's getting fired unless you like see them taking the member data and like putting it right into free chat GPT. I think you should have those conversations, right? And make some adjustments, coach them up, those types of things. And if it's a habitual pattern, then I think you might take a more firm stance. But I think this also, your leadership should be sending the signal in terms of supporting, experimenting, but not unlimited, not unenforced, right? So again, not to be intimidating or based out of fear, but people just need to know that you cannot do certain things.
Right. That's why proposing use, that's why I was commenting on use cases, right?
Yep.
As a member association, staff member, this is what I want to do. This is how I would like to use this free AI tool. Can I do that here? Or like educate a little bit people around these use cases and offer a safe space to do that, because people probably don't know. They have good intentions, right? But they don't know how far they can go. And so that's a leadership responsibility. I believe somebody was asking Carlos about, do we need an AI policy versus a data governance policy? My position is that it depends on what is in the content, right? What one is seeking is protection. That's what I would offer. So it depends on the key elements. If the key elements are included on each one, I don't know what you would like to offer.
That's a consultant. It depends response.
It yes.
That's consultant speak. No, I would say depending on the size of the organization, right? Typically, I think 80% ish are small staff, less than 10 people on staff. So you don't want to have like a super complex policy. I think there are opportunities. I'll answer it this way. I think there are opportunities to merge the tool depending on the complexity in the organization. I would even offer that, your data governance policy might be a subset of your AI. Some people may see it the other way, but rather than having like this, I don't know, a huge portfolio of policies that you
Right.
have to evaluate every year, I think this is an opportunity to consolidate, be smarter about it. I think eventually they might become one and the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do we make it easy for people to understand and get to the policy as well?
Yep. Yep. Was that a question or you just?
No, I was playing back what you were saying.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
For
I
once, I
think,
was agreeing with you, Carlos.
okay. Thank you. I think that means I'll take the win on that one. We are going to move on and we're going to talk about, I guess, the IP wild card. Some of these were supposed to be lightning rounds, but I don't think we accelerated like we should have, and that's okay. Talking about the IP aspect of this. And so I think everybody is at a point where they're using some of these tools and, again, I like to say it amplifies your creativity. Something was born out of your conversations with these tools. And if you try to put it in the marketplace and make some money off of it, I think the question arises, who owns this? Whose intellectual property is it? Do you have any standing of putting this product out in the marketplace and to make some, generate revenue, even from a membership standpoint? We'll get there. What's your responsibility? And what does the, I guess, case law say about whether you own anything that was derived, which again, if you think about it, and I'm not sure if I'm making the point, I'm probably, on the fence on both sides, seeing both sides. But if you think about generative AI being trained on, the vast amount of data that's out there on the web, naturally your creation is pieces of everything else that's there. So again, can you really own that? I can touch a little bit about what case law says and what are some, precedent that has been said. But Victoria, what say you on this?
I think it's a shaky ground, to be honest. And there is, of course, some precedent, but I don't think we have seen the last of it. And so it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on the evolution. I think we can talk about probably how things are today, but that doesn't mean by any means that that's how it's going to stay.
I also see there's also growing societal resistance to AI slop. And so, again, you probably see a proliferation of like weekly newsletters on social media where before, some people wouldn't even write blurbs or posts. And so now everybody's a writer type thing. And so, there's a saturation in terms of social media where, you're seeing the telltale signs of, but wait, here's more, or, again, those M dashes, you might say, and I know people are defensive when you talk about those M dashes, or this whole story with one-liners through the whole thing, and they're like, wait a minute, that's my stuff. I write like that. Like, no way. But I think I guess back to the point, in terms of, do you own some of these things? I would say that I think there has been some rulings to say like you are not the owner of some of those things that were derived. So I think the burden is on you to prove some of those things that you actually owned it. It came from your brain. If you can show that, and you can show that, I guess, chain of origin, then you might have a better chance. But if you're trademarking something, or, filing for a patent or something like that, I think that will probably come up. I'm not an expert. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you the specifics, but to bring it back to the organization, if you're putting out a new product, maybe it's a membership facing product, and maybe it was used with generative AI. Again, if you're going to make some money off of it, just some things to think about. Victoria, anything else
Yeah,
to that?
I think in the future, right? Like in the future, if we were to create a digital twin, and could we in the future trademark or have some sort of IP sort of protection, that may be in the future, but right now it's shaky ground. And I just want to acknowledge the discussion also going on in the chat, right? It's a little bit, I'm reading what Mary is saying, it's the wild west, right? So at this point, I think it's a level of awareness of how much you want to be in the wild west from that perspective.
I think there are some filters in these tools. And so, again, if you've watched the Super Bowl, and then maybe you watched the halftime show, Bad Bunny, if you try to create or generate some images of Bad Bunny, or maybe even any celebrity, I think the tool stops you and says, based on copyright, we cannot let you, create it that way. I think also what you see in terms of the industry or industries, I think Marvel entered into a license agreement, with these, generative AI tools to be able to license their vast repository, right, of creativity, you could say. So I think we're going to get better over time in terms of, taking this mosaic of large language models and like figuring out where did you come from, the origin. And so if you do put something together, if it's an idea, if it's an image, you should be able to trace it. It doesn't exist now, but I see signs or hints of it. You might be able to say like this particular image, has 100 or 50 source points, and here they are, right? It borrowed from this particular artist, or maybe something that you wrote mimic the style of this particular writer, author type thing. So we're not there yet, but I think that's where we have to be heading.
Yeah. And in a more sort of from association, organizational perspective, cybersecurity is becoming a big issue, right? Deepfakes. So that's something to be aware of. I think the call to action here is perhaps or an invitation to reflect on how are we keeping up to date, right? What are the basics, for example, to recognize a deepfake? Because it's not a question if it's going to happen, it's about when it's going to happen.
In terms of software, I think even software developers now, they always borrow snippets of code. Probably, they go to GitHub and like look at some sort, source code and they borrow it from it, whether it's like a for loop or something like that. I think that's always happened, but in terms of creating your own software, like again, who's going to be forensically looking at, some of these software tools? You'd think about vibe coding, right? And people building their own tools, like who owns this? Again, it's one thing to say, like, look at the tool that I've built, and you just put it out there for people to like kick the tires around and like have fun with it. You might even be able to get away with like donate a coffee or buy me a coffee. But if you want to put it into the marketplace, I think again that's where copywriting, trademarking comes into play. And I think you're going to have a more defensible origin story in terms of how that came about, how it was created.
Yeah.
Wish we had some attorneys here who can unmute themselves and talk about this. If you have some things to share, again, raise your hand and tell us about it. And it's okay if not. So the cliche check here is nothing you create with AI is your intellectual property. So I don't know if it's cliche yet, but I think it will become, cliche at some point. So again, I think as we use these tools more and more, you're starting to hear, some of those things more and more. So a good thing to keep in mind. And so again, I think taking it back to the organization level, when we think about declining membership rates, when we think about diversifying your, revenue streams, and you want to put a new product into the marketplace, new member service, new offering, like you should be thinking about, some of those things. I would take it a step further in terms of contracts, that you sign or that you enter with your, vendors, consultants. It's not IPs per se, but it's contracts and agreements. And so make sure you pay attention to some of those things, either that are in the contract or not in the contract. And again, I think that whole chain of custody argument, you enter an agreement with your direct partner vendor, you don't know who they partner with. And so again, your data may be shared, and it's good just to be explicit in that contract language. Learn that from the Tech Council. One of our Adam S., I'll say, he talks about this extensively. We did have a session on that. So again, I think your contract game it should mature to account for some of these things. We are at 42 minutes past the hour. I want to transition into an open discussion. And so again, I think this is your time. We've done, a lot of the talking, I would say. And so if you are brave enough, maybe Nicole, let's unmute some folks and, let's continue this discussion. Like, what are you seeing boots on the ground? What are you thinking about at your own organization? How are you approaching free versus paid tools? Let's continue that conversation. Barbara, I saw your comments a lot in the chat, so I'm going to ask anything that stands out, anything that you're thinking about in your role?
Oh my, yes.
But yeah, much to cover.
But I love using some. I mean, this morning I had a meeting that went in 12 unexpected directions in 30 minutes. So my notes were a bit scattershot, but I had grabbed Zoom minutes from it, and I was able to blend the two together using Perplexity.
to
to pull out the things that I overlooked or forgot to write down. And it was great. And I shared it with my partner who was in on the meeting. And it's just like, oh my, here it is all coherent instead of in my scribbles. It was nice.
Yeah, we didn't touch on the transcribing tools in terms of meetings, and maybe 6 months ago, people when they popped up into a meeting, they're like, "Who's that? Let's kick them out right away." Maybe stances have changed or opinions have changed, and maybe they're more welcome. Who knows? Um, just a general question: how are you approaching free versus paid inside the organization? What guidance? What's stopping you? Are you using them at all? Again, B, if you are brave enough, unmute yourself and share with us. Tracy, I see a familiar face here, unless she just went away. Tracy Harris. Okay, I see Veronica. Veronica, go ahead, please.
Sure. So our organization has been promoting that we start experimenting with AI and share our use cases and that sort of thing. And that push has been going on for over a year now. We only just recently drafted an AI policy, and I think it is probably still going to change a lot. It's very high level, but at least there's some guardrails. But right now, we've just been encouraged to use AI very vaguely, um, free or paid. And then recently, our organization has offered if a staff member requests a paid subscription to a specific AI tool, they'll consider it on a case-by-case basis. So it still feels a little wild to me that we're being really encouraged to go out there into the Wild West and see what works. I mean, obviously, having the common sense about what member data we protect. Um, but yeah, I hope that we move more towards if we're going to push our staff experiment with AI, that we use paid models or tighten up our policy, one or the other, or both.
Yeah, I think in the absence of a policy or general guidelines, I think you are implicitly giving them permission to roam in the wild and use some of these tools. I mean, you're not saying it, but I think by you not saying anything, it's just like, well, okay, well, I'm on my own, right? So maybe I make the decision. So again, I just feel like that's probably some of the things where, people don't know how or what first step to take. And so then they do nothing. But it's like, try to break that down and, start simple. You've got to get started somewhere.
Yeah.
You hear from your colleagues and you hear on this conversation that people are using these tools. That's not going to stop. And so again, how do you get in front of that and leverage and use it as an opportunity for yourself to then, have that conversation, create that policy? Victoria, go ahead.
I was going to say that it's a start, right? What Barbara was saying. I think it's a good start in terms of having even a basic or foundational AI policy. It's better to get started and learning by doing than completely avoiding the conversation, right? I also want to highlight, somebody posted, we are in a hard place. It's a difficult position to be in terms of investment, right? So how to navigate that, perhaps an idea I would offer is a little bit of education, right? If we're experimenting, these are the guardrails, right, in terms of data and so forth. And as we start to transition maybe to paid tools, these are the expanded sort of things that we can do, and have the discussion in the open so that nobody feels that it's difficult to have conversations about this, because we want to make sure that people feel encouraged, but then also they have the tools and the guardrails to do what they need to do.
I see a comment, Joshua Webster. What would you mind sharing? Maybe that robust process that your organization uses. I feel like that's on the extreme side. I think that's a beautiful thing to have that evaluation process. And so here's enter a tool. Let's run it through a process to evaluate. Joshua, go ahead.
Uh, yeah, so it's the review process, as I said, it's basically a kind of a combination between our legal department, for like a concern of IP protection, as well as our information systems team, and kind of looking at what's there. It's on, as someone mentioned earlier, it's a bit of a case by case basis if somebody wants kind of a like to have a new tool looked at. But even if there's existing tools, as mentioned through like the Microsoft suite of services, before they have it kind of unlocked through our enterprise contract. They look at it, they see how it operates, and try to determine, you know, how it will be done and how it can be used, and then from there, it's sort of disseminated out amongst the staff.
And I think that speaks to governance, right? Which is kind of a scary word for people sometimes, and people shrink or cringe when you talk about governance. And I think that instills fear. But I think that's the right way to think about some of these tools. There are only going to be more of these tools, right? And they're going to be, more choices, but having that framework of taking it through that evaluation process, and not just IT either, right? So I think everybody has some skin in the game, so to speak. Again, breaking down those silos, having those conversations, and having that proper governance, I think will make sure that the organization protects itself, from, because somebody, if there are some risks around it, if you have that process, I think they will be uncovered. So that's a great way. And I think to Victoria's point, again, just talking to peers, colleagues, about, well, what are you doing, right? People love to ask, like, well, what are you doing at your organization? And then I would say, Joshua, that's amazing. I think if you could share like how you got to where you were, or where you are now, I'm sorry, where you started, I think that might give people hope to say like, okay, if I start small, take X number of steps, I could get to where Joshua is. I think another thing to Nicole, I'm gonna ask you anything from your side. I don't want to just hog the microphone on my side.
Sorry, I'm multitasking a little over here. There's a lot of interesting stuff in the chat, actually. Vanessa says we plan on bringing a consultant to perform an AI audit for us, looking for tools to help streamline / reduce some of the admin work that comes with our roles.
Yeah, I would say, I guess whether it's free or paid, and again, you have your business reasons why, and again, your risk tolerance in terms of which tools to use. But as you start to bring in consultants, and to think about audits, and to look at your security posture, I think it's one thing to chase these tools and think about it at the tactical level. I think take that step back and maybe have at the leadership level, have conversations around, where are we focusing these tools? What business problems are we trying to solve based on some of these tools? So I think, you have to take your medicine, eat your vegetables in terms of, some of these basic things that you have to do. But I think once you get past that point and you do take that first step and you do get started and you may increase your confidence, I think you have to start having those conversations and ask those questions sooner rather than later. You don't want to unleash the tools. Victoria, we were saying like the Oprah way, right? Like everybody gets a license, and then you have no structure around that. And then a year later, $30 per license multiplied by however many staff got the license. What did you accomplish? What were those checkpoints to come back and say, like, here's what we learned, here's how we can incorporate to the business? Victoria, I'm pretty sure you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I think the common thread is people, right? People's attitude and disposition towards the adoption of these tools, and how we manage that disposition and attitude towards business outcomes, right? Business first, AI second. But I think what there's a lot of is what is from a change management perspective also, who are the early adopters perhaps, and who are going to be the quick followers in your organization, and how are you engaging with them in service of first safe experimentation, but second in service of business outcomes.
And I also think in terms of, the free versus paid and not just what happens if you take that first step, but also what happens if you don't take that first step. So if you continue to sit on the sidelines and think about it, maybe overthink, should I get in? Should I empower my staff? Should we at least talk about some of these things? And I think before you know it, a substantial amount of time may have passed and now you're playing catch up. So again, I think as associations, I think it's tough enough to, recruit some of our members, in terms of what we offer, membership value. I think AI is changing the game in terms of their expectations and their demands and what they want and some of the complexity of questions. And so if you don't take that step forward, free or paid, and you don't take charge of that, like what does it mean for your organization to meet those demands of the member? So again, I feel like it's a give and take, and not from a daunting standpoint, but we like to say, people that use AI will take the jobs of people who don't if they're better at it. I would expand that and say associations who don't use AI might be overtaken by associations who do figure out how to leverage it and incorporate it, across the enterprise. So just some things to consider, right? As we're all in this together, we're all thinking about it, we're all talking about it. What are those consequences of inaction?
Yeah, there's a cost of opportunity. That's what I hear you say, right,
Yes.
Carlos? That there's a cost of opportunity in both cases, right? Of doing something and then not doing something as well. And I like your reframing in terms of how much is it going to cost to catch up, right? And at least I would offer, make that a conscious decision, right? Make that a conscious decision in terms of, okay, I'm seeing X, Y, and Z, but I'm still deciding not to enter, right? But there's going to be a point of where AI is already becoming mainstream. So the question is, how much can one postpone perhaps that decision, right?
And I would offer, I'm happy to have, to continue the conversation, make myself available. I'm going to put my LinkedIn profile in the chat. So if you want to connect, if you've got any questions, I'm happy to continue that discussion. I think, again, at this point, we've got to continue to talk about it, and not just talk, but also act on it as well. So I think that kind of brings us to a conclusion here in terms of, covering the point counterpoint, free versus paid tools. We took a lot of detours. Tried to sprinkle in some, I'm not a dad, but dad jokes, I like to say, some bad jokes. But again, I hope you had fun. Just wanted to make it, fun, light, hearty. I saw some great chats, and so I'm pretty sure some good intelligence will come out of that. Victoria, any last parting words?
Thank you to everyone, and thank you, Carlos, also for making this happen. I still want to talk to your wife, I'll say.
I will let her know.